By day, he saved lives. By night, he took them. For years, the people of Japan saw him as a hero, a firefighter, a family man. He wore a smile on television, held medals in his hands, and spoke gently in front of cameras. But behind that calm, polite face was something darker, something twisted, something that haunted Japan for over a decade. He wasn't just a thief, he wasn't just a liar. He was one of the most chilling criminals Japan has ever known, a man who fooled an entire country, and claimed the lives of 22 innocent people before anyone even noticed. His name was Kiyotaka Katsuta, and this is the story of his double life. By all appearances, Kiyotaka Katsuta was a model citizen, a firefighter, a family man, a quiet worker who risked his life to save others. People respected him. His neighbors greeted him with a bow, his co-workers praised his courage, and on national television, he was even called a hero. But no one knew what happened when the lights went out. Behind the uniform, behind the smile, was a man hiding something dark. By day, he ran into burning buildings to pull people out. But at night, he slipped into strangers' homes to take what wasn't his, and sometimes, to do things far worse. He wasn't just a thief. He wasn't just a liar. He was living two lives. And for nearly a decade, no one suspected a thing. Katsuta was born in 1948, in the Kyoto countryside. His family wasn't poor. They had land, they had a home, and they gave him everything a boy could need. But something about him was different. While his sister studied hard and made her parents proud, young Kiyotaka grew restless. He hated being compared to her. He hated being told what to do. School bored him. Hard work disgusted him. And soon, he found a faster way to get what he wanted: stealing. At first, it was small, just snacks from the school canteen. Then it was money. Bicycles. Wallets. Anything he could sell. And by the time he was caught, he had already committed more than 20 thefts. He was just a teenager. He was sent to a reform school. But instead of changing, he became more careful, more strategic. He learned that if he smiled, if he acted polite, if he played the part of a normal man, he could get away with anything. And that's exactly what he did. When he became a firefighter at age 23, people saw him as a new man. He was clean-cut, brave, disciplined, but they didn't know about the debts. They didn't know about the nights he spent on the road, driving trucks for extra money. They didn't know that underneath his calm exterior was a growing hunger, for status, for luxury, for control. The hero everyone loved was slowly becoming a predator no one saw coming. Long before the headlines, long before the crimes, Kiyotaka Katsuta was just a boy, quiet, distant, and always looking for something more. He grew up in a village in Kyoto, surrounded by farmland and tradition. His family was not poor. They had land, status, and comfort. His father was strict, his mother reserved, and then there was his older sister, the perfect child, smart, polite, obedient. She was everything Kiyotaka refused to be. From an early age, he felt like he was living in her shadow. No matter what he did, it was never enough. His teacher scolded him. His parents were disappointed, and the more he was pushed to behave, the more he pulled away. He didn't enjoy school. In fact, he hated it. While his classmates studied for exams, Kiyotaka found other interests, like skipping class, bragging to friends, and spending money on sweets and flashy items. He always had cash in his pocket, even when others didn't, and that made him feel powerful. But the money didn't come from home. It came from other people's belongings. He started small, stealing from classmates, swiping snacks, taking spare coins. But as time passed, he got bolder. He stole bikes, wallets, anything with value. He didn't feel guilt, he felt excitement, a secret thrill no one could take from him. At just 17, his world finally caught up with him. After snatching a woman's handbag on the street, he was caught red-handed. Police searched his records and uncovered a long list of petty crimes, over 20 thefts in 1 year. He had taken more than 1.18 million yen. The school expelled him. His parents were humiliated, and for the first time, the system stepped in. Kiyotaka was sent to a reform school, a place for troubled youth. But instead of learning discipline, he learned to hide his true self better. He studied people. He practiced smiling. He discovered that if he looked normal, he could be anything. And in the shadows of that institution, a different kind of criminal was quietly taking shape, not one ruled by rage, but by calculation. He wasn't just misbehaving anymore, he was preparing. When Kiyotaka Katsuta walked out of the reform school, he wasn't a reformed man, he was a smarter one, a better actor, a more careful liar, and more than anything, he was determined to prove that he could still rise above the judgment in every pair of eyes around him. But the world didn't forgive easily. With no high school diploma, no credentials, and a criminal past hanging over him like a shadow, he struggled to find work. Eventually, his father, still clinging to hope, stepped in and asked a favor. Through connections, he helped Kiyotaka land a job at an auto parts factory. It was honest work. Quiet. Stable. But stability was not what Katsuta wanted. When a theft occurred at the factory, all eyes turned to him. He swore he was innocent, but his reputation was louder than his words. Humiliated, he quit. And just like that, his second chance slipped through his fingers. He drifted. Until he met her. She was kind, trusting, and blind to his past. They fell in love fast, burning with a hope that maybe, just maybe, they could escape the weight of his history. When her parents subjected to the relationship, they ran away together, first to Osaka, then to Nara. There, Katsuta became a long-distance truck driver. The couple married in secret and even had a child. A simple life. A family. A new beginning. Then came the fire station. In 1972, at age 23, Katsuta passed the exam and became a firefighter. With a clean uniform and a steady paycheck, he began building a new identity. He smiled more. Worked harder. Saved lives. In the eyes of his neighbors and co-workers, he was no longer an ex-delinquent. He was brave. Noble. Even admirable. But old habits don't die. They wait. Despite his income, he couldn't keep up with his spending. He wanted the best clothes, the fanciest drinks, the most expensive toys. He started chasing status, not survival. And when money ran dry, he remembered something from his past, a skill he had once mastered. So, while the city slept, Katsuta drove through Osaka, Kyoto, and Kobe, not to deliver goods, but to look for unlocked doors, quiet windows, and forgotten wallets. By day, he wore a helmet and carried a hose. By night, he wore gloves and carried silence. One man. Two lives, and only one of them had rules. It happened on a quiet September night in 1972, the kind of night where the streets were empty, and the only sound was the soft hum of streetlights. Katsuta, dressed in plain clothes, drove through a quiet neighborhood in Kyoto's Yamashina district. His eyes scanned the darkened homes. Most were locked. Most had sleeping families inside, but one apartment caught his attention. The door wasn't properly secured. The lights were off. He waited, listened, and then slipped inside. His goal was simple: money. Just a quick in and out, nothing more. But as he moved through the small home, he heard something: footsteps. A woman had woken up. She was young, just 24, and worked as a hostess at a local club. She wasn't expecting company, and when their eyes met in the dim hallway, panic filled the space between them. In that moment, something inside Katsuta shifted. The calm vanished. What followed wasn't planned, but it was irreversible. When he left the apartment, he carried 1,000 yen in stolen cash, but behind him, he had left something far heavier: silence. The next morning, police arrived. What they found was tragic, but confusing. The victim, due to her job and social circle, had many acquaintances. Some were wealthy clients. Some were known troublemakers. Investigators focused on the people around her, the ones most likely to be involved in late-night arguments or complicated relationships. But none of them led to an arrest. They never even looked in Katsuta's direction. To the police, he was a firefighter, a man who ran into burning buildings, a husband, a father, a civil servant. No one thought to ask what he was doing that night. No one even questioned him, and that's when it clicked for him. The danger wasn't in being caught, it was in being noticed. And as long as he played the hero by day, he could disappear by night. He wasn't just relieved. He was thrilled. The fear of getting caught had vanished, and in its place came confidence, the kind of confidence that makes a man believe he's untouchable. One time was never enough. After that first crime, something inside Katsuta changed. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about control. Power. The thrill of walking away unseen. He had tasted what it felt like to play both roles, savior and shadow, and now, he couldn't stop. But this time, he would be smarter. He would choose his victims carefully. He began targeting women who lived alone, most of them hostesses or workers in the nightlife industry, people whose lives were often misunderstood, people whose routines were easy to track. They got off work late, came home tired, and often didn't have anyone waiting for them. They were, in Katsuta's mind, ideal. He studied their patterns, followed their movements. He waited until just the right moment, usually late at night, in quiet alleys or apartment buildings without cameras. His method was always the same: a quick break-in, a confrontation, and then silence. And yet, the silence didn't reach the police. Each time, investigators focused on the victim's lifestyle. They assumed the attacker was someone from her circle, an ex-boyfriend, a jealous customer, a co-worker, and Katsuta, the polite firefighter with clean shoes and calm speech, was never even considered. That was his shield. The job, the uniform, the carefully maintained image. While others were questioned, he was celebrated. At work, he was praised for his bravery. At home, he was seen as a responsible husband and father. No one knew what he did when the city fell asleep. With every crime, he became more confident, more precise. He didn't leave fingerprints. He avoided cameras. He knew which areas the police would overlook. It was almost like he had built an entire playbook from watching how they failed. And the worst part? It worked. The victims became statistics. Their cases were shelved. Some weren't even linked together. There was no pattern, at least, not one the police could see. But Katsuta saw it clearly. It was his design. To him, each success was proof that he was evolving, that he was smarter than the system, that he was, in his own twisted mind, unstoppable. For years, Kiyotaka Katsuta lived in two separate worlds, one full of fire alarms and flashing red trucks, the other, hidden in the shadows. But in 1977, those worlds collided, in the most unexpected way. That year, he became a national face. His bravery during a house fire, where he saved a trapped woman from the smoke-filled second floor, earned him praise not just in the firehouse, but across the country. TV networks took notice. Newspapers printed his name, and soon, he was invited to appear on a popular variety show as a real-life hero. There he was, on screen, smiling politely, shaking hands with the host. He wore his uniform proudly, answered questions humbly, and even spoke about the joy of fatherhood. The audience applauded. The nation admired him. He received gift vouchers, prize money, and letters from children calling him an inspiration. He was everything Japan wanted in a man: brave, disciplined, family-oriented. But what no one knew was that just weeks before this interview, Katsuta had committed another crime. And worse, he wasn't finished yet. In August of that same year, he broke into another apartment. This time, the victim was a 33-year-old woman, alone at night. When it was over, he left not only with valuables, but also with something far more disturbing: the knowledge that no one would suspect him. Not now. Not when his face had just been on national TV. The contrast was brutal. On one hand, he was hailed as a symbol of public service. On the other, he was out at night, violating homes and crossing lines that could never be undone. And the public? They believed every word he said on that broadcast. He played the role perfectly: a dedicated firefighter, a loyal husband, a caring father. His co-workers admired him. His neighbors trusted him. His superiors promoted him. But the man they were praising wasn't real. He was an invention. A mask. And behind that mask was a man who had already left a trail of shattered lives, and was quietly planning the next. By the end of the 1970s, Kiyotaka Katsuta was no longer just a thief in the dark. He had crossed a line, and he wasn't looking back. The crimes had changed. They were no longer about sneaking in and slipping away. They were faster, bolder, more dangerous. And now, he was armed. In December 1977, Katsuta stole a shotgun during a break-in. With that weapon, he didn't just gain firepower, he gained confidence. He believed no one could stop him, not even the police. His first major act came at dawn. Dressed in plain clothes, he drove a stolen car to a bank in Kobe. He waited for a young bank worker to step outside with cash. Then, with terrifying calm, he raised the shotgun and demanded everything. Within seconds, he had 4.1 million yen and disappeared into the morning mist. The attack shocked the country. Armed robbery, let alone one with a firearm, was rare in Japan. But this was just the beginning. 2 years later, in Nagoya, he targeted a credit collector and walked away with over 600,000 yen in checks. Then came a convenience store in the middle of the night. He stormed in, waved the shotgun, and forced the manager to open the safe. He left with nearly 6 million yen. But that wasn't all. He forced the manager to drive him, and on the road, he took his life to erase the witness. The news exploded across Japan. People were terrified. Police stations buzzed with pressure. Who was this masked man haunting their cities? How could he appear and vanish so easily? Then, in an almost unthinkable twist, Katsuta escalated again. He didn't just steal from civilians, he attacked the police. In October 1982, after staging a fake tip-off about a stolen vehicle, Katsuta ambushed officers at a parking lot. When they arrived, he rammed his car into theirs, grabbed a metal rod, and overpowered one of the policemen. He took the officer's handgun and fled. Now, he had not one, but two weapons, and the entire nation was on high alert. For the first time, Japanese authorities declared an internal emergency. Armed patrols flooded the streets. Roadblocks went up. Still, Katsuta remained a ghost, always one step ahead, always hidden behind the mask of an ordinary man. The man who once saved lives was now feared as one of the most dangerous figures in the country, and yet, he still hadn't been caught. For years, Kiyotaka Katsuta had moved like a shadow. He struck fast, vanished quicker, and left behind only questions. But even the most careful predator eventually slips. And for Katsuta, that moment came on a cold morning in March 1983. It started like so many times before. He spotted a man leaving a bank, carrying a briefcase. Inside, more than 1 million yen. Katsuta followed him to a parking lot, calm and confident. When the man got into his car, Katsuta climbed into the passenger seat, pulled out a stolen police revolver, and spoke in a low, firm voice. "You've heard about the police losing a gun, haven't you?" he said. "This is that gun. Now throw the money in the back seat and get out of the car." But something went wrong. The man didn't panic. He didn't beg. Instead, he lunged. The two struggled inside the vehicle, the gun between them. It was fast, messy, and loud. A bank employee nearby heard the noise and ran over. Within seconds, more people joined. Katsuta was outnumbered, and for the first time in years, he froze. They dragged him from the car. They held him down. And when police arrived, the man they arrested wasn't just a failed thief. He was a storm that had raged through Japan for over a decade. At first, they thought they had caught a dangerous robber with a stolen weapon. But as they searched his car, his home, and finally, his mind, something darker came into focus. Katsuta confessed. Not to one crime. Not to 5, but to hundreds. Over 300 burglaries. And more terrifying, he admitted to taking the lives of 22 people across multiple cities. Kyoto, Osaka, Nagoya. His trail stretched wider than anyone had imagined. Police were stunned. They had only linked him to 8 open homicide cases, but his quiet confession rewrote everything. His memory was sharp. His details chilling. Each story matched a name, a place, a life lost and long forgotten by the system. The man who had once been Japan's bravest firefighter, was now its most prolific predator, and the country, still shaken from his crimes, had one question left to ask. How had no one seen the monster behind the hero's smile? The trial of Kiyotaka Katsuta was not just a legal process, it was a national reckoning. When the courtroom doors opened, the man who once stood in a firefighter's uniform now wore prison gray. His posture was calm, his voice low. He didn't argue. He didn't deny. He admitted everything, every burglary, every shooting, every life taken in silence. He sat with his head bowed as prosecutors listed the charges. 8 confirmed murders. Hundreds of thefts. And yet, police believed the real number was far higher. Katsuta confessed to 22 killings. But for many, the worst part wasn't what he did, it was how long he got away with it. At his sentencing, the judge called his crimes cold and calculated, adding that they showed no trace of humanity. The verdict was final, death by hanging. But even as the court closed the chapter, the story wasn't over. Inside prison, something shifted, or at least appeared to. Katsuta began studying Braille. He wrote essays. He translated literary works into raised dots for the visually impaired. He published a book about his time in prison, titled Days Adrift on a Sea of Guilt. The tone was reflective, the words soft. He said he wanted the royalties to go to the victims' families. He wrote letters, too. Apologies, pages of regret addressed to those he had hurt. Some believed him. Some didn't. To many, it felt like a performance, one final mask from a man who had worn so many. The public watched with mixed emotions. Could a man responsible for so much pain ever truly change? Was it redemption? Or reputation? In the end, the justice system didn't wait for the answer. On November 30, 2000, after spending nearly 2 decades on death row, Katsuta was executed. The news came quietly, without spectacle, no press conference, no public farewell, just a final, silent ending to one of Japan's darkest criminal sagas. But long after the sentence was carried out, his shadow remained, in case files, in grieving families, and in a country still trying to understand how a hero became a hunter. For over a decade, Kiyotaka Katsuta walked freely through the heart of society. He shook hands with neighbors, posed for cameras, held children in his arms, and at night, he turned into something unrecognizable. The question that lingered long after his execution wasn't just how he committed his crimes, but why no one stopped him sooner. The answer is uncomfortable. Katsuta survived in the blind spots of the system, not because he was invisible, but because people didn't look closely enough. Investigators, faced with female victims who worked in nightlife or lived alone, made assumptions. They followed bias, not evidence. She must have known the attacker, they thought. This must be personal. No one expected the killer to be a man with medals on his wall. In the eyes of the public, he was everything Japan respected: orderly, clean-cut, hard-working. He fit the image of a man who could not be guilty, and that image was his best disguise. Even after he was caught, many struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the monster he revealed. How could a firefighter, someone trusted to run into danger, be the very danger itself? The truth is, we often mistake kindness for innocence. We confuse politeness with morality. We trust uniforms and smiles far too easily, but behind the neatest shirts can hide the darkest intentions. Katsuta was not just a criminal, he was a reflection of what happens when a society looks away, when prejudice replaces investigation, when appearances silence suspicion. And so his story leaves behind more than just scars. It leaves a warning. Monsters don't always hide in shadows. Sometimes, they hide in plain sight. And sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones we'd never dare to doubt.